What inspires some artists to remove the fine sheen, to pull back their highly produced, deliberately crafted style, and go back to basics, just their voice and simple instrumental accompaniment? Acoustic albums have been a popular format for a long time, and are often praised for their ability to connect the listener to the art and the artist on a more intimate level. They're also a powerful tool for artists who want to express themselves in a raw, minimalist style. At least in roots music, most songs find their start in simple arrangements. It's much easier for a songwriter to work out the kinks of a song when it's just them and an acoustic guitar or piano. Commonly, artists will demo songs as acoustic numbers before moving on to record and release a more produced version with additional instrumentation and other production elements. But sometimes a collection of songs just doesn't fit a more produced style, and is instead recorded and released in pure troubadour fashion without a lot of additional flair. So why do artists and bands create acoustic albums? Acoustic albums give an opportunity for the songs to stand on their own merit, without additional production or arrangement frills. The acoustic album format can be particularly impactful on projects with personal lyrics. An artist can make a much bigger statement with their lyrics when the listener's attention is focused directly at them. They also offer a creative challenge to artists who are trying to figure out how to do a lot with very little. While the acoustic album is a time-honored format, what actually makes an album an acoustic album is very ill-defined. One could easily argue that acoustic albums as we know them today are a response to the electrification of music that occurred in the 60s and 70s. In the early days of the recording industry, it was not uncommon for folk, blues, and hillbilly records to feature solo performers. It's difficult to view these records in the same light as the modern acoustic album, because at the time it was nothing unusual. However, as blues performers began integrating more with rock and R&B, the Nashville sound pushed hillbilly music to the fringes, and stars of folk began experimenting with rock music, a prominent artist rejecting full band arrangements and modern production was seen as contrarian. While I can't seem to find a definitive answer for when the term acoustic album was first coined, the television series MTV Unplugged and VH1 Storytellers helped popularize the minimalist musical format in the 1990s by featuring popular artists presenting their songs stripped back with a focus on storytelling. The defining characteristic of an acoustic album is that, through omission or reduction of electric instruments and production elements, an increased focus on the songwriting and acoustic instrumentation, the record sits in stark contrast to the expected norms of the time or of the artist's typical musical style. Acoustic albums can be broken down into several categories. First, we have the stripped down albums. Now, these aren't necessarily acoustic albums, but they are often grouped into the same conversations. This is when an artist or band has a more raw album that still features other instrumentation, but is still much more stripped down in comparison to the rest of their other works. These might still feature some electric guitar or organ, synth, other electric instruments, but typically they're sparser in their arrangement. It's just like there's more room to breathe. Some notable examples would include Jason Isbell's Southeastern, The Killer's Pressure Machines, Taylor Swift's Folklore, Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks, which came at the end of a run of more rock-focused projects, Midland's The Sonic Ranch, Amanda Shire's My Piece of Land, or Phil Vassar's Stripped Down, which is an aptly fitting title for this. Then we have alternate versions. This is when artists are reimagining, re-recording, and re-releasing songs that they have already released as acoustic versions. There were a lot of these during the lockdown. An example I really like is Hayes Carll's Alone Together sessions. But I also think this is where you would slot in like Clapton or Nirvana's MTV Unplugged sessions, which were both released as albums following. The key defining feature of this format though is it's not new material, it's reimagined material. Then we have what I'm going to call the Troubadour albums, and I'm going to break this up into two categories. We'll start with what I'm calling the Enhanced Troubadour album. So this is when the main focus is on the singer and their instrument, but they do have some additional light instrumental accompaniment. Some good examples of this would be Joni Mitchell's Blue, Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. You could argue Willie Nelson's Red-Headed Stranger is in this. Most of Colter Wall's discography fits into this category, along with one of the most famous acoustic albums out there, Bon Iver's For Emma Forever Ago. Last, we have what I'm calling the Pure Troubadour album. This is when it's absolutely no frills, just a singer and their instrument. This tends to be the least popular format for an acoustic album because it is very disciplined, it is very restrictive, but I'd say one of the most famous examples of this would be Johnny Cash's American recordings, There's also one I'm looking forward to that's coming up, which is Jason Isbell's Foxes in the Snow, coming out on March 7th. On the surface, an acoustic album might seem like it's simpler to produce than a full band or a pop album. There may be less variables involved in the production of an acoustic album. However, by removing elements, you're increasing the scrutiny on what is there. In that way, I think acoustic albums might be more difficult to produce well in comparison to full band and pop arrangements, because there's nowhere to hide. If a track doesn't sound good, you can't just like turn down the volume on it a little bit to kind of mask it in or mix it out well or anything. What you put down on tape is there. Because of this, in order to hold an audience's attention, an acoustic album has to be exceptional. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why artists produce acoustic albums here in a moment, but before I go on, I just want to say that if you're enjoying this, please follow along, subscribe, like this video. I cover roots music generally, Americana, alt country, all sorts of different stuff on this channel. If you follow along, I might talk more about some of your favorite artists as well. Alright, back to it. The actual impetus for an artist to record an acoustic album varies from project to project. In the case of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, arguably the most famous acoustic album of all time, and often seen as the gold standard for this style of album, the songs were so compelling in their one-man acoustic demo form that Bruce decided against expanding them into full band arrangements. Bruce had originally recorded the songs as demos on a 4-track recorder in his bedroom, with the intention of using them as a guide to show the band how he wanted the arrangements to sound in a later recording session. However, Springsteen's influences for the writing, Flannery O'Connor, film noir, Howard Zinn, Woody Guthrie, and his own self-imposed isolation, led him to write lyrics and arrangements that lent themselves better to sparse production and haunting performances. While the E Street Band might be the mightiest rock and roll band that ever was, Springsteen trusted his gut and released the songs as they were. Bruce accidentally recorded one of the greatest albums in his catalog, as well as a guiding light for future acoustic albums, and Nebraska still stands as a powerful testament to serving the song. Something similar happened with Johnny Cash's American recordings. When Rick Rubin and Cash began working together, they started out recording demos in Rick's living room, primarily focusing on songs that Cash had heard through the years and wanted to try to play. On Rubin's suggestion, Cash stuck with this fully acoustic style for the remainder of the process, resulting in a dark and moody album that helped cement Cash's legacy and relaunch his late career on his own terms. Throughout the various editions of the American recording sessions, Cash and Rubin played with different formats, including a full band album with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers backing up Cash, but focusing on the acoustic style led to such incredible, late career-defining songs as Delia's Gone, God's Gonna Cut You Down, and Hurt. Fresh off their 2015 album Star Wars, which was full of heavily produced, loud rock songs, Wilco decided that their next album would instead focus on minimalism. Singer, songwriter, and bandleader Jeff Tweedy described the band's approach to the album and corresponding tour as trying to play everything as small as possible, restricting the amount of gear and effects they would use, swapping drumsticks for brushes, and swapping the SG and Marshall amp for acoustic guitars. The resulting album Schmilco's acoustic leanings fall more in line with an artistic experiment or artistic statement, but just like with Nebraska, it still serves the songs. I think if Wilco had taken the Schmilco songwriting and tried to apply the Star Wars treatment to it, it wouldn't have worked as well, and vice versa. Fun side note, they named the album Star Wars because Disney had just bought the Star Wars IP, and knowing that Disney is very protective of their intellectual property, they were hoping that they were going to get a cease and desist letter and then rename the album Cease and Desist. That did not work out, but it's a hilarious piece of music trivia. In some cases, artists may release an acoustic album because they haven't gotten to the point yet where it's really feasible for them to do a full band album. Think about Tyler Childers' Bottles and Bibles, Zach Bryan's Deanne, or Drayton Farley's A Hard Up Life. These artists likely recorded their early acoustic albums because it's what their means at the time allowed. While producing an acoustic album does force artists to bring their A-game to the session, it is a lot cheaper than making a full band record. There's a lot less cost that goes into an acoustic record than hiring musicians, setting up practice time, spending extra money and time for studio setup, and for mixing a full band. And if you're primarily going to be performing as a solo musician in your early gigs, an acoustic album is a more accurate representation of what your live show might be like. In Childers, Bryan's, and Farley's cases, something was so compelling about the songs that listeners were gripped. Fans began coming to shows, spending money on merch, and sharing the music with their friends. As their careers grew, these songwriters had more opportunities to make music with other instrumentalists, more money to hire session players and live bands, and a greater ability to push the boundaries of their art. By the time they produced their next studio albums, they were better equipped to bring their visions more fully to life. When an artist switches from a more stripped-back raw style to more polished and produced sound, they often face backlash from older fans who liked their original sound. Bob Dylan famously faced backlash for going electric in the 60s, even being called Judas by fans of his more folk-oriented discography. However, artists that can make it past this initial backlash can have big, vibrant careers. I will say though, I do think it can be difficult for artists to translate their acoustic numbers into big full band arrangements. When Dylan and the band recorded 1974's Before the Flood live album, some of the older songs that he chose for the album that he had originally recorded acoustically, when brought into the full band arrangement, just sounded grating to my ears. Beyond that, it can be a difficult line to walk if you want to satisfy fans of the original recording and yet still push the boundaries further. I recently saw Cole Chaney open for Shane Smith and the Saints, and Cole brought with him a full 5-piece band complete with a drummer. It was a good live show, but some of the songs off his album Mercy lacked punch to me because they weren't written for a full band. The drums and bass felt shoehorned into me. And I wouldn't say it was bad by any means. I liked the performance. I just felt like some of the arrangements felt forced. While starting out as an acoustic performer may be budget-friendly and a good reflection of where you are at that point in your artistic journey, if your intention as an artist is to eventually break beyond the acoustic format, you might find that it's a bit constraining. In some cases too, the acoustic format is adopted as a marketing tool. It has become increasingly common in recent years for artists to record and release alternate versions of their songs to promote their newest album. While Taylor Swift's Folklore was an interesting redirection into more indie folk aesthetics and stripped-back arrangements that made an artistic statement, recordings like the acoustic version of Antihero off Midnights exists more as a marketing tactic meant to boost engagement with her music. And if you enjoy these alternate acoustic versions, there's nothing wrong with that. But it is evident that their intended purpose is somewhat cynical. And in some case, acoustic albums exist because there's no better way to say what the songs are trying to say. This is what I expect we'll see on Jason Isbell's upcoming album, Foxes in the Snow. The more I hear about it, and the more leaks of songs and lyrics I keep seeing from his ongoing solo acoustic tour, the more evidence becoming that this is going to be Isbell's most personal record ever, and I'm not surprised that for that he chose to go just his voice, just a guitar, focus on the songwriting. No matter the style or the reason for creating, acoustic albums give the audience a unique opportunity to see the inner workings of an artist's craft and deeper insight into their minds. The medium may appear simple, but is deceptively complex. If a song is able to keep a listener hooked even without the flash of modern production styles, it's a damn good indicator that there's something special there. What's your favorite acoustic album? Are there any important ones I missed here? And do you like this format generally? Let me know in the comments below. My name is Brent Funkhauser from Red Moon Media. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and follow along. If you're a fan of Americana, alt-country, roots music generally, this is the channel for you, and I appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.